Law 4. Always say less than necessary. When you are trying to impress people with words, the more you say, the more common you appear, and the less in control. Even if you are saying something banal, it will seem original if you make it vague, open-ended, and sphinx-like. Powerful people impress and intimidate by saying less. The more you say, the more likely you are to say something foolish. Transgression of the law. Gnaeus Marcius, also known as Coriolanus, was a celebrated hero of ancient Rome. In the early 5th century BC, he fought many battles, saving the city from disaster time and again. Spending most of his life on the battlefield, he was a legend to the people, a figure of almost mythical stature. In 454 BC, Coriolanus decided to leverage his fame and entered the realm of politics, aiming for the high office of consul. Tradition required candidates to give a public address early in the campaign. When Coriolanus stepped before the people, he began by showing the many scars he had earned over 17 years of fighting for Rome. The crowd was deeply moved by these visible tokens of his bravery and patriotism, so much so that few paid attention to the lengthy speech that followed. His election seemed assured. However, on the polling day, Coriolanus made a grand entrance into the forum, escorted by the entire Senate and the city's aristocrats. This ostentatious display unsettled the common folk. Then he spoke again, addressing mostly the wealthy citizens by his side. His speech was arrogant and insolent. He boasted of his battlefield exploits, made jokes that only the aristocrats appreciated, and hurled accusations at his opponents. He even speculated on the wealth he would bring to Rome, all the while claiming certain victory. The people listened this time and were shocked to discover that their legendary soldier was also a common braggart. Word of Coriolanus's second speech spread rapidly, and the people turned out in large numbers to ensure he was not elected. Defeated, Coriolanus returned to the battlefield, bitter and vowing revenge on the commoners who had spurned him. Not long after, a large shipment of grain arrived in Rome. The Senate was ready to distribute this food to the people for free, but just as they were about to vote, Coriolanus intervened. He argued that the distribution would harm the city. Some senators were swayed, and the vote hung in the balance. Coriolanus went further, condemning democracy itself and calling for the removal of the people's representatives, advocating for rule by the aristocrats. When news of Coriolanus's latest speech reached the people, their fury was boundless. The tribunes demanded that Coriolanus appear before them. He refused, and riots erupted throughout the city. Fearing the people's wrath, the Senate voted in favor of the grain distribution. Though the tribunes were appeased, the people still demanded that Coriolanus speak to them and apologize. If he repented and agreed to keep his opinions to himself, he could return to the battlefield. Coriolanus appeared before the people one last time. He began slowly and softly, but soon his speech grew more blunt and insulting. His tone was arrogant, his expression disdainful. The more he spoke, the angrier the people became until finally, they shouted him down and silenced him. The tribunes convened, condemned Coriolanus to death, and ordered the magistrates to take him to the top of the Tarpeian Rock and throw him over. The delighted crowd cheered the decision. However, the patricians intervened, and his sentence was commuted to lifelong banishment. When the people learned that Rome's great military hero would never return, they celebrated in the streets, more jubilant than they had ever been, even after the defeat of a foreign enemy. Interpretation. Before venturing into the realm of politics, the name of Coriolanus was shrouded in awe and reverence. His feats on the battlefield painted him as a figure of immense bravery. The citizens, knowing little of his true nature, spun countless legends around his name. However, the moment Coriolanus stood before the Roman populace and began to speak, the grandeur and mystery surrounding him dissolved. He boasted and blustered like an ordinary soldier, hurling insults and slanders as if plagued by insecurity. Instantly, he became a far cry from the hero the people had envisioned. The stark contrast between the legend and the reality left the people profoundly disappointed. The more Coriolanus spoke, the less powerful he seemed. for a person who cannot govern his words reveals his inability to govern himself and thus loses the respect of others. Had Coriolanus restrained his tongue, the citizens would not have been offended by his true sentiments. He would have preserved his formidable aura, likely been elected consul, and achieved his anti-democratic ambitions. Yet, the human tongue is a wild beast that few can master. It constantly strains to escape its cage, and if not tamed, it will wreak havoc and sorrow. Power eludes those who waste their treasure of words. Observance of the law. In the court of Louis XIV, nobles and ministers would spend endless days and nights debating the affairs of state. They would confer, argue, forge and dissolve alliances, then argue some more, until the critical moment arrived. Two individuals would be chosen to present the opposing sides to Louis himself, who would then decide the matter. After these representatives were selected, further debates would ensue. How should the issues be phrased? What would please Louis, and what might irk him? When would be the best time to approach him, and in which part of the Grand Versailles Palace? What expressions should they wear? Finally, after all these details were meticulously arranged, the fateful moment would arrive. The two chosen men would approach Louis, always a delicate affair. And once they had his ear, they would elaborate on the issue, detailing the options. Louis would listen in silence, his face an unreadable mask. When each had finished and asked for his opinion, he would gaze at them both and simply say, "I shall see." Then, he would walk away. The ministers and courtiers would hear no more on the subject from the king. They would only see the outcome weeks later when he made his decision and acted. He never bothered to consult them again on the matter. Interpretation. Louis XIV was a man of very few words. His most famous saying, "L'état, c'est moi, I am the state," was as succinct as it was eloquent. His notorious "I shall see" was one of several extremely short phrases he employed for all sorts of requests. Louis was not always so reticent. In his youth, he was known for speaking at length and taking delight in his own eloquence. However, his later taciturnity was a deliberate act, a mask he used to keep everyone around him off balance. No one knew exactly where he stood or could predict his reactions. No one could attempt to deceive him by saying what they thought he wanted to hear, because no one knew what he wanted to hear. As they talked on and on to the silent Louis, they revealed more and more about themselves, information he would later use against them to great effect. In the end, Louis's silence kept those around him terrified and under his control. It was one of the cornerstones of his power. As Saint Simon wrote, "No one knew as well as he how to sell his words, his smile, even his glances." Everything in him was valuable because he created differences, and his majesty was enhanced by the sparseness of his words. Keys to power. In the intricate game of power, saying less than needed often magnifies your stature, making you seem greater and more formidable than you truly are. Your silence unsettles others, for humans are wired to unravel mysteries and decode intentions. By withholding information, you cloak your thoughts and motivations in secrecy, leaving them guessing and vulnerable. Your succinct responses and pauses force them into a defensive stance, prompting them to fill the void with revealing chatter, unwittingly divulging their weaknesses. They depart from your presence feeling stripped bare, their minds replaying your every word, adding to your aura of authority. This strategy isn't just for monarchs and leaders. In various aspects of life, speaking less renders you profound and enigmatic. Artist Andy Warhol grasped this concept early on, realizing that silence often wields more influence than words. His cryptic interviews left interviewers puzzled, attributing deeper meaning to his ambiguous statements. Warhol's reticence about his own work fueled speculation and enhanced its value, a tactic he learned from the master of mystery, Marcel Duchamp. By speaking sparingly, you project significance and control while minimizing the risk of uttering folly or provoking danger. A historical anecdote illustrates this point vividly. When Russian Tsar Nicholas I faced a rebellion, he sentenced a leader, Kondraty Ryleyev, to death. Miraculously, Ryleyev survived a botched hanging, attributing the mishap to Russian incompetence. The Tsar, vexed by this mockery, revoked the pardon upon learning of Rylyev's disparaging remarks. The next day, the execution was carried out successfully, demonstrating the power of measured speech and strategic silence. Learn the lesson. Once the words are out, you cannot take them back. Keep them under control. Be particularly careful with sarcasm. The momentary satisfaction you gain with your biting words will be outweighed by the price you pay. Image: the oracle at Delphi. When visitors consulted the oracle, the priestess would utter a few enigmatic words that seemed full of meaning and import. No one disobeyed the words of the oracle. They held power over life and death. Authority: never start moving your own lips and teeth before the subordinates do. The longer I keep quiet, the sooner others move their lips and teeth. As they move their lips and teeth, I can thereby understand their real intentions. If the sovereign is not mysterious, the ministers will find opportunity to take and take. Han Fei Tzu, Chinese philosopher, 3rd century BC. Reversal: there are times when it is unwise to be silent. Silence can arouse suspicion and even insecurity, especially in your superiors. A vague or ambiguous comment can open you up to interpretations you had not bargained for. Silence and saying less than necessary must be practiced with caution, then, and in the right situations. It is occasionally wiser to imitate the court jester, who plays the fool but knows he is smarter than the king. He talks and entertains, and no one suspects that he is more than just a fool. Also, words can sometimes act as a kind of smokescreen for any deception you might practice. By bending your listener's ear with talk, you can distract and mesmerize them. The more you talk, in fact, the less suspicious of you they become. The verbose are not perceived as sly and manipulative, but as helpless and unsophisticated. This is the reverse of the silent policy employed by the powerful. By talking more and making yourself appear weaker and less intelligent than your mark, you can practice deception with greater ease.